Hello and welcome to the cake tip. Today we're going to be making gluten-free lamingtons. First of all, you're going to need a shallow 10 by 10 inch square tin. This is what we're going to bake our sponge in. Then you're going to need to place 190 grams of either soft butter or margarine. We're using either a standalone mixer or a hand mixer for this because there is quite a bit of a whipping involved. Then we're going to add to the margarine or butter 170 grams of caster sugar or fine sugar. Lower your mixer down and turn it on to a slow mode first of all, and then increase so that you can fully combine the caster sugar and butter until it's nice and silky. Once the mix is ready, scrape down the sides, and this is the sort of texture that you're looking for, nice and smooth. Then it's time to add the eggs. You're going to need 3 large eggs, and these eggs are going to need to be fully beaten, and we're going to be pouring them in, so you're going to need them to be in a jug. We're going to be pouring our eggs in just a little at a time. So we will start the mixer on a low speed and pour a little bit in, and then increase the speed and then decrease the speed and pour a little bit in, and continue that until all the egg mixture has been used up. The reason that we're doing it in this process and very slowly is because we don't want to risk the mix curdling at all. If it curdles, then we're not going to get the rise on the sponge that we need, because we need this sponge to be very airy but very strong at the same time. We're looking for a consistency that is very similar to single cream. It needs to be runny and shiny at the same time, not curdled. Once you've used the last part of your egg up, scrape down the sides of the bowl to make sure that you can incorporate the last bit of your mix. Pop your mixer back down and give the mix one last blast so it's fully combined and ready for the vanilla and flour. This is the consistency you're looking for. As you can see, it's nice and silky. Now you're going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. I recommend using real vanilla extract. The reason being is that it's really important to get that vanilla-y taste in the sponge when making lamingtons. Once the vanilla's in, drop the mixer back down and give it a quick blast just to combine the vanilla. You don't need to do it for too long. Next, you're going to prepare your flour mix. So you're going to need 280 grams of gluten-free plain flour, not self-raising, plain flour. And to the flour, you're going to add 2 teaspoons of gluten-free baking powder. Once you've popped both of those in, then just grab a spoon and move the flour around to make sure that the baking powder is fully combined into the flour before we add it to our mix. Now we're going to add the flour to the mix. We're going to do this 1 spoonful at a time because we're using gluten-free plain flour and not self-raising flour, and we want to try and keep as much air in the mixture as possible because the mix needs to be nice and fluffy and light, but at the same time it needs to be very strong to be able to take the chocolate icing that's going to cover it after. When you've used up all of your flour, scrape down the sides to make sure that every last little bit is in, and then pop your mixer back down and give it one last blast. Not too long because you've still got milk to add. Last of all, you're going to add 2 tablespoons of milk to your mixture whilst your mixer is actually going. This is just to give it that last little bit of silkiness. So the end result should be a beautiful, thick, shiny, creamy mix. If your mix looks like this, you know you're going to get a lovely, fantastic sponge, and it's going to be strong at the same time. Now take hold of your prepared tin and scrape your mix into the centre of it. You don't need to worry about pushing it to the sides. We shall do that afterwards with either a spatula, a palette knife, or a spoon. Spread your mix right to the corners and sides of the tin. It's really important that we do this because we need to get a nice level bake so that when it comes to cutting our squares, they're all the same sort of height. Now place your tin in an oven that's been preheated to 150 degrees centigrade. You're going to need to bake it for approximately 30 to 35 minutes until it's golden brown and springs back to the touch. When your sponge is baked, remove it from the oven and leave it to cool in the tin for approximately 10 minutes. Then turn it out onto a wire rack and allow it to cool completely. To make your icing, you're going to need 150 grams of gluten-free dark chocolate in a bowl. Then you're going to need 40 grams of softened butter, then 200 grams of icing sugar and 100 ml of milk. Then melt in either a double boiler or the microwave, but just make sure you do it very gently and slowly. Once all the ingredients have melted, you should end up with this lovely, thick, shiny, chocolatey mix that smells heavenly. Pop your chocolate mix aside and start to prepare your sponge ready for dipping. You'll need to remove all 4 edges of your sponge to begin with. You only need to remove the very edges, just the skin of the sides. Once you've removed all of them, it's time to cut the cake into squares. So it's entirely up to you how big you want your Lamingtons to be. I've cut them here into 16 squares, but that's quite large, but I know my kids like it that size. Once you've cut all of your squares, you're going to remove the skin from the top and the bottom of the cake as well. The reason we're doing this is so that when we come to dipping it into the chocolate, we know that the chocolate is going to fully take and not slide off of the skin of the cake. Once you've removed the skin from the cake, this is what your squares should look like, ready for dipping. Now you may find that some of your squares only actually have skin on one side. If it's like this on the bottom, then you don't need to take anything off because that will take to the chocolate fine. Continue doing this for all of your squares, so none of them have skins on and they all look great. Once you finish your sponge squares, you're going to need 250 grams of either desiccated or shredded coconut and your chocolate mix that you set aside. Grab yourself a couple of forks and push one of them into a square of sponge. You're going to dip this into the chocolate mix and fully cover it, then afterwards pop it into the coconut and fully coat it with that. The reason you've got two forks is that you're going to use your other fork to push the sponge off of the first fork. Let's start. So fully push it into the chocolate mix, and once it's fully covered, then you can use the fork to take it back out again. This is a very messy process and I've tried it many different ways and I still end up in a mess every single time, so be prepared to get a little bit messy. After you've taken it out of the chocolate, pop it into the coconut and cover it. You can use your fork, your other fork, to help cover it with the coconut, or you can actually use your hands if you prefer. The other thing is that you will need to have a couple of pieces of baking paper or parchment paper which you're going to lay your covered lamingtons onto so that they don't stick to anything. You may find, because it is quite a messy process, that you need more than a couple of forks, or you choose to wash them after each lamington. Next piece of sponge, we're going to do exactly the same thing. Pop it into the chocolate, turn it over so it's fully covered with the chocolate, and then pop it into the coconut. Use either the fork or your hands to cover it with the coconut. You'll also see that sometimes you need to drain off some of the chocolate that's on the sponge because it can get a little bit cloggy and you don't need too much to cover it. You're going to repeat this process for all of the squares of sponge cake until you've used all of them up. That it does take roughly about 15 to 20 minutes to complete all of them. If you do have any sponge, coconut and chocolate left over at the end, they actually make fantastic Lamington cake balls. They do take a couple of hours to fully set and be ready for eating, and then afterwards store them in a container. Now you're ready to share them with your friends. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and please remember to subscribe for further videos.